Today's activity is going to focus on the Battle of Guadalcanal. After the United States inflicted a serious defeat on Japan at the Battle of Midway, the United States is going to go on the offense. Its first goal is to capture the Japanese naval base at Rabaul. Rabaul is at the end of the Solomon Islands, not far from New Guinea. Now, to do this, the United States is going to have to capture an island not far from Rabaul to which to launch their invasion from. They choose the island of Guadalcanal. It's about 500, 600 miles from Rabaul. I can show you here in the end of the Solomon Chains. So from there, they can launch their invasion of Rabaul. Now, Guadalcanal is a jungle island. There is a small Japanese airfield and there's a garrison on the island. It's about 90 miles by 25, so it's not really a small island. It has an active 8,000-foot volcano. Now, to give you an idea of how big it is, we're going to show you a map of New Jersey. And if Guadalcanal was laid across it, it would stretch from Sandy Hook well into the Pennsylvania, over the Pennsylvania border. Now here are the Solomon Islands, and you can see where Guadalcanal is. Rabaul is up beyond the map, the very top of the screen to the left. Here's a close-up of the Battle of Guadalcanal Island. And this is where the United States would launch their invasion. Now, because of an agreement between Churchill and Roosevelt that Germany is to be defeated first as they pose a bigger threat to Britain, and then Japan afterwards, resources are limited. The United States could only use the Navy and its Marines since they really wouldn't be used very much in Europe, but the Army would be mostly focusing in Europe. On August 7th, 1942, the 1st Marine Division, 16,000 men, stormed ashore at Guadalcanal. This was the first amphibious invasion in American history, and it was a total surprise to the Japanese. They had no idea the Marines were coming. They quickly capture the airfield, and they name it after the Major Henderson, who died at Midway, and now becomes Henderson Field. It'll be the focus of many Japanese attacks to recapture the airfield, which they never do. Now, the Japanese attack back at Savo Island on the night of August 8th and 9th. Their goal is to destroy the American ships that are there. They go at night, so the Allied naval ships protecting the transport ships to attack them and avoid American planes, which do not fly at night. The Japanese sink 4 Allied heavy cruisers, 3 American and 1 Australian. We see this artist rendition showing the Japanese. They turned on these high-powered searchlights, and they were able to pick out the American ships and sink 4 of them. However, they were never able to get through to where the troop transport ships were off the coast of Guadalcanal. So even though it's a serious defeat, they're still able to keep bringing men ashore. Now, on August 19th, Japan sends more troops to Guadalcanal. Now, the ships sail from Rabaul at night, again to avoid the American planes, and they come down in the area of water between the islands known as the Slot. The nightly transportation of troops becomes known by the Americans as the Tokyo Express. This will start 6 months of jungle fighting for control of the island. The Japanese launch banzai charges against the Marines. These are basically suicidal charges which cause high losses among the Japanese soldiers. Banzai is actually a term which means 1,000 years of life to the emperor. But as we can see here from this photograph, many of the Japanese soldiers who died later with the water washing up, you can see them being covered over with sand. September 15th, the American carrier USS Wasp was sunk by a Japanese submarine. October 26th, Santa Cruz Islands. This would be a very pivotal battle during the Guadalcanal campaign. The Japanese made a major attack on the island in an attempt to destroy the carriers. Yamamoto's plan was to attack U.S. naval ships, especially the aircraft carriers. But Halsey was ready to fight back. The Japanese do succeed in sinking the USS Hornet, which had carried the Doolittle raid bombers to Japan. But the Japanese lose 99 planes and 148 of their airmen. As we can see here, the planes dropping bombs onto the Hornet. It was a Japanese victory, but the loss of planes and pilots crippled the Japanese Navy. Santa Cruz ended any hope the Japanese Navy would win a decisive victory over the Americans before the industrial might of the United States made winning impossible. As one person said, Santa Cruz was a Japanese victory. That victory cost Japan her last best hope to win the war. The Japanese continue to fight the Marines, and the fighting is very intense. The Marines start creating nicknames for places on the island like Purple Heart Ridge. The Japanese are dug into tunnels and holes, and the Marines literally have to fight them out and then drag them out of these holes. By November, the Japanese make a last major attempt to capture Henderson Field. It fails. Allied aircraft attack the Japanese ships and sink most of the Japanese troop transports, stopping most of the Japanese soldiers from ever reaching Guadalcanal. By January of 1943, the Japanese finally decide they can't win and start to evacuate the island. By February 9th, the battle is over. Here we see a photograph of U.S. Marines who have had their own souvenirs that they've taken from the island. The Guadalcanal campaign was costly to Japan strategically and in material losses and manpower. They lost around 25,000 experienced ground troops. They could not replace the aircraft destroyed and the ships sunk. And very importantly, they could not replace the highly trained veteran pilots lost. Many of the veteran pilots who had attacked Pearl Harbor were now dead. This was the first step in a long string of American successes that would eventually lead to the surrender of Japan. But perhaps as important as the military victory for the Allies was the psychological victory. The Allies had beaten Japan's best land, air, and naval forces. After Guadalcanal, the Allies had less fear and awe of the Japanese military than they did previously. The Americans suffered very serious losses at Guadalcanal too. 7,100 U.S. Marines and sailors were killed in action. Here we see a photograph of the United States military memorial on the island of Guadalcanal. In addition, the United States lost 29 ships, including 2 aircraft carriers, the USS Wasp and the USS Hornet, along with 615 planes. Very recently, the USS Hornet was discovered underwater, and they went down and took some amazing photographs. Here we see the hangar deck with one of the vehicles that was used to tow the planes around below deck. Here are some anti-aircraft guns on the Hornet. They found some planes underwater, took some nice photographs. On the island itself, when the vehicles or any of the material they used in the battle were damaged, they were simply just left behind since there really wasn't a way to retrieve these vehicles. Here we see an American Stuart tank that's been there for the last 75 years, rusting, being covered in vines. These are Marine amphibious vehicles that brought the Marines ashore, again left behind. And this was an American plane that had been shot down over the island, and it's still there today. April 18th, 1943, about 2 months after Guadalcanal, U.S. planes intercepted and shot down Yamamoto's plane, killing him. U.S. codebreakers discovered the flight plan and sent out a squadron of Mosquito fighters, as you see here in this artistic rendition of it, shooting down the plane that Yamamoto was in. Strangely enough, the plane is actually still there since there's no way of removing it. They did discover Yamamoto's body, the Japanese did, and he was sent back to Japan on board a battleship for a full military funeral. All right, this concludes our session on Guadalcanal. I do have 5 questions here. If you could answer these questions and upload them to Google Classroom, and you have to, let's see, today's Friday. I'm going to give you to Saturday morning at 9 o'clock to do them. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this activity on Guadalcanal, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and the weekend coming up. Thank you and goodbye.